and welcome. In this episode, I'm going to share ominous encounters with Wendigo that have left people looking for advice and answers. These stories include a person who has had some weird experiences in the woods along with finding some bizarre footprints, and two people who detail their dreams about this terrifying creature that has left them worried and seeking guidance. But first, we start with a poster who details some strange activity around her home before she and her husband saw a creature amongst the trees. Also, if you'd like to help support the channel, click on the join button below. Alright, let's get into today's stories. The first story of this episode comes to us from New Hampshire, where a woman and her husband looked outside their home one night to see what she believes to be a Wendigo amongst the trees. Not knowing what to do, she has turned to the online community for answers. She does not say where exactly in New Hampshire her story takes place. The original poster, or OP, and her husband had a rather strange encounter that left them both feeling unsettled. They live on a property consisting of 5 acres in New Hampshire, where they moved to only a year before having their encounter. One of the OP's favorite things to do with her son was take walks around their land, which consists of both areas clear of vegetation and trails leading into the woods. However, during the month leading up to her posting her story online, their walks took on an eerie feel, leaving her with a sense of unease. Even their cat's behavior had become more alert and on edge during these outings, although she admits this detail may not be entirely relevant. Ever since this unsettling feeling took hold, she and her son gravitated closer to the safety of their house while walking. The week before she posted, she was on one of her afternoon walks when she began hearing animal noises that seemed out of place due to all the animals and their noises having disappeared in the time leading up to her encounter. This included deer, turkey, and foxes. Upon hearing the noises once again, she thought maybe that the deer had returned. She shared her thoughts with her husband, and they both agreed to keep an eye out for any wildlife. Little did she know this would lead to a truly terrifying experience. Fast forward to the evening before she posted her story, after they put their son to bed. While she and her husband were in their home's front room, they suddenly heard sounds that resembled the cries of coyotes. However, these sounds were different, more piercing and amplified than anything they had ever heard before. It was far from the usual noises they were accustomed to hearing. Initially, they didn't think much of it, but then her husband went to lock up for the night and urgently called her name. They looked out the sliding glass door to see a chilling sight at the edge of the tree line. A towering figure loomed in the darkness. It was approximately 7 feet tall and lanky, with its silhouette blending into the night as the moon hung behind a veil of clouds. Her husband went for his gun and flashlight, but when he returned, the creature was gone. In that moment, their stomachs sank in a mix of fear and disbelief. The OP says she has refused to go outside with their son and has saged her home. She ends her post by asking if it could be a Wendigo and says that's what her mother-in-law believes this creature to be. She then asked if anyone has any advice or ideas. In the comments of many Wendigo and Skinwalker stories, I have come across one user I have seen comment on many of these encounters and dreams who says he has had his own personal experiences with these creatures. He has studied and researched them, and based on the information he gives people, he seems to be very knowledgeable about these creatures. Well, I found him in the comments of this post as well, and he thinks this is definitely a Wendigo, albeit a smaller one. When the OP asked him if it will continue to show itself around her property, he said it could be that it likes her scent and has chosen her as its next meal. He then suggested that she sage her property line to keep this creature away, and says fire is useful against Wendigo as it can kill them. I've heard this before as well, being that the Algonquin legend and lore surrounding Wendigo say they have hearts made of ice, and so it would make sense that fire would be its weakness. The fact that their hearts are made of ice also makes people believe that they can only be seen and encountered during winter and/or in cold climates. That's why most of the sightings usually only happen in the northern United States and in Canada. If this happened to me, it would be safe to say there would be a for sale sign in my yard the next day. I couldn't imagine looking outside my home to see a creature like that lurking in the trees. What do you think about this one? And what would you do if you saw a Wendigo in the trees around your property? The next story comes to us from a poster who had a very strange experience in either 2017 or 2018 when they found footprints in the snow they believed belonged to a Wendigo. The original poster lives on 2 acres of land in a forest in the western part of Maryland, very close to the West Virginia state line. Following a snowfall, the OP and his sister were working on clearing a path to a barn located at the rear of their property. When they were on their way back from the barn, they noticed distinct footprints measuring approximately 16 to 18 inches that went a little ways into the forest before stopping. They returned to their house, not talking about what they saw, but his sister later suggested in a lighthearted manner that the footprints could have belonged to a Wendigo. When he thinks back and considers the time of year when they found the footprints, the limited visibility in the forest, and being that they were like 12 years old, he genuinely believes that if he had investigated the footprints alone, he might not be here today to tell his story. What he finds very unsettling is the realization that this entity may have been watching them each night as they let their animals inside, waiting for the opportune moment to target one of them. While he cannot be entirely certain that this was indeed a Wendigo, all the evidence to him seems to point to this being the case. He ends his post asking if anyone can help confirm whether this was a Wendigo or not. In response to a comment, he gives some more information about some of the things he would experience while in the woods. He and his brother would spend hours in the woods where they would often hear strange sounds that everyone they told about would dismiss as just the wind. One particular sound they heard while in the woods was a haunting whistle, but this whistle was a much higher pitch than a normal whistle. Then sometimes they had the eerie sensation of being watched that would prevent them from venturing deeper into the forest. Sometimes when he was in the kitchen doing the dishes, he would catch a glimpse of something peculiar in the trees just outside the window. It appeared to be a long, mysterious figure, but he would quickly divert his gaze because he didn't want to know what was really out there. He closes by mentioning that the kitchen sink was positioned right in front of a window that overlooked the woods. It's been said and well documented that these beings are expert mimics, and people often describe the whistling they hear before, during, and after encounters. An eerie, haunting whistling that does not sound natural. Wendigo usually use their mimicking abilities to try and lure unsuspecting victims further into the forest. Fortunately, the whistling and other things the OP heard made them not want to go farther into the woods. However, without a physical description, I can't say for certain what I think the OP saw the footprints of and what he heard in the woods. And honestly, even if he had pictures of the footprints, I'm not sure anyone could link it back to a Wendigo anyway. I know I wouldn't be able to. The whistling makes me think it could have been one, but other cryptids can do this as well. This also goes along with the feeling of being watched. And based on the size of the footprints, it could have very well been a Sasquatch too. What do you think the OP saw the footprints of and hears in the woods around his home? A Wendigo or something else? The next story comes to us from a poster who details a bizarre dream he had that involved a Wendigo. I've talked about on this channel before how these beings seem to be able to affect our dreams, and have had stories where people even see the creatures in their dreams before seeing them in the real world. This is especially true of Windigo, but there have been other instances where other cryptids possess this ability. But this story seems to add to that theory. 2 nights before posting his story online, the original poster had a bizarre dream that woke him up at just after 3:30 a.m. In the dream, he was with his family and others who were strangers to him, wandering through a maze of back roads surrounded by trees. In his dream, his dog, who had been dead for 4 or 5 years at the time of the events, was with him outside barking furiously at a deer. The OP says he was fully aware his dog had been gone for years, but in the dream he seemed so real. He was yelling for his dog to come inside and leave the deer alone, but he just wouldn't listen, continuing to approach the wild animal. The OP then started walking the 40 or 50 yards toward his dog and picked him up. When he did, he realized his dog was covered in blood, but he brushed this off, too caught up in the moment. He carried his dog while asking what on the earth was happening and why he was there. That's when the deer, standing just 20 yards away, turned its head and locked eyes with the OP. This thing's eyes glowed with an eerie blue light. As he watched, the deer's face and body began to contort, morphing into something grotesque. It had a long horn, almost like a unicorn, protruding from above its nose but below its eyes. Its ribs were now exposed and were oozing blood. Its mouth was also dripping blood. Yet despite all these horrifying details, the OP could not tear his gaze from those desolate eyes. He says they seemed to see right through him. He knew then he needed to get back inside and took off running for the safety of the house while still holding on to his dog. He sprinted to the house and went inside, trying to warn everyone about the horrifying creature lurking outside and about his dog being alive. He even went to his brother's room to tell him what was happening, but his brother was asleep and didn't really seem like himself. When he entered his room, he was met with a sight and smell that sent shivers down his spine. His room reeked of decay as if it was drenched in the stench of rot. As he left his brother's room, his attention was drawn down the hallway to a window where he saw the creature standing, peering in at him with those glowing blue eyes. He mentions here that the window was about 5 to 7 feet off the ground. He turned to head back to the living room only to find the deer standing there. It started walking toward him, then started following him. Not knowing what to do, he hid in a corner of the room, covering himself with a blanket, curling into a ball. He focused on slowing his breathing, desperately trying to remain silent. He peered out from under the blanket, repeating a prayer over and over, saying, "In Jesus' name I pray, Amen." But to his astonishment, this creature glided across the room without taking a single step and stopped, looming over him, staring down at him. He woke up freaking out, which also woke up his girlfriend, who saw this, asking him what was wrong. He ended up telling her about his dream, and they wrote it down. They did this because they document all of his dreams. He ends his post saying he isn't sure what to think, not knowing if this was a Wendigo or some kind of demon, asking for help from anyone who can provide it. In the comments of this post, I found the same user I mentioned in the first story of this episode, who has experience with and seems to be very knowledgeable when it comes to Wendigo. He told the OP that it seems like there was a Wendigo spirit trying to torment him. I've seen him talk about how these creatures in dreams can take on different forms other than their natural physical form. This sometimes includes them looking like a deer or having a skull for a face or head, even with antlers. But this is only in the dreams, and I know this isn't what Wendigo look like. They more closely resemble crawlers actually, but this user says they are able to take on different forms when they invade our dreams. I've talked before about this, these creatures being able to alter and/or invade our dreams, and I continue to see people post about their dreams online, or maybe I should be calling them nightmares, with these beings and how real and vivid they are. Now I know it could just be a bad dream based on something they've seen, but what if they are having these dreams before they see a Wendigo? Vivid dreams that seem so real and have such an impact on them that they look to share their stories, searching for answers. I've said before that if cryptids can alter how we feel, because people often feel ill before, during, and after encounters, they can mess with our heads, and they have the ability to use mind speak, then who's to say they can't somehow invade or alter our dreams? With as many posts as I see about people having these nightmares, especially involving Wendigo, it certainly seems that way. Unfortunately, we may never know for certain. What do you think about the OP's dream? And what do you think about Wendigo, or any other cryptid for that matter, being able to invade our dreams? The final story of this episode comes to us from a poster who also had a bizarre dream where they believe they saw a Wendigo. The original poster does not say where exactly their story takes place, just that they live in the Canadian countryside. This puts them in prime Wendigo territory, as many of these creatures are spotted north of the border in Canada. This is his first dream about the creature, but it was impactful enough for him to post his story online and search for answers. The original poster and his girlfriend live in the city, but before posting his story, he had recently returned after spending approximately 3 years in his hometown in the Canadian countryside. The night he posted online was his 4th night back in the city, and typically he struggled to sleep while there. However, on this particular night, he managed to fall asleep around 9:30 or 10 p.m. In the dream, he recalls that he and his girlfriend were preparing for bed in a camp trailer situated in a park, or perhaps his family's privately owned beach. Then suddenly they heard a loud noise coming from the nearby woods. He peered out but could only discern a large, ominous, dark figure. It was carrying a doe with a broken neck, but the deer was still alive. The creature approached the trailer, trying to finish off the doe by repeatedly striking its head against the window at the opposite end of the trailer, while the OP and his girlfriend cautiously moved away from it to the other end while trying to remain silent. After a few unsuccessful attempts, the creature grew frustrated and flung the doe onto the ground before stomping on its head, leaving nothing behind. At that moment, his girlfriend made a slight noise, capturing the figure's attention. It whipped its head around and approached the trailer before tearing a hole in the roof. It then locked its gaze directly onto the OP as he positioned himself between it and his girlfriend. However, strangely, it seemed uninterested in the OP and reached around him, grabbing his girlfriend. This is when he woke up. The last thing he remembers was hearing his girlfriend scream before waking up. But he found her silently lying beside him in bed. After the dream, he was unable to sleep. He ends his post by asking if anyone who reads his story knows what the dream could mean. Here we have yet another post documenting a strange dream had by someone involving a Wendigo. As I mentioned with the last story, there are a lot of posts detailing strange dreams people have. Actually, there are so many that I could do episode after episode on Wendigos that are nothing but people having dreams about them and then turning to the online community in search for answers because of the lasting impact it has had on them. I will say that some come after an encounter, or when people start going down the cryptid rabbit hole and start listening to stories about and researching Wendigo in particular. But then there are some where the people have never even seen one or listened to a story. They don't know what the creature in their dream is, and they post in these forums looking for answers, just to find out later that it is, or at least all signs point to it being, a Wendigo. It is a very strange yet fascinating phenomenon to say the least, and I will admit that it leaves me with more questions than answers. I do want to point out that the OP did mention in his story that he spent about 3 years in the Canadian countryside. Perhaps he caught the attention of a Wendigo while he was out there, and it somehow followed him back to the city. I mentioned in the previous stories of this episode the commenter who said that Wendigo seemed to like someone's scent and perhaps had chosen them as its next meal. In the dream, the Wendigo was more focused on the girlfriend, so maybe it had attached itself to her. This is all speculation on my part though, and he doesn't say that his girlfriend was with him while he was living in the Canadian countryside. But it is worth mentioning the hitchhiker effect, where these beings attach themselves to someone who goes out into the forest either looking for them or they take an interest in that person. This could possibly be what has happened here to the OP and or his girlfriend. What do you think about this one? Have you ever had a strange, vivid dream about a Wendigo? Or any other cryptid for that matter? And that's going to do it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you'd like to hear more stories like these and other types of cryptids, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you want to send me your story, I'd love to read it. My email is wolfwhocriedcryptid@gmail.com. I will also put it in the description below. With your permission, I may want to use it in an episode. Even if you'd prefer that I didn't share your story on my channel and just want someone to listen, email me. We can privately talk about your encounter. And please remember to keep it civil in the comments section. No one deserves to be ridiculed whether they believe or not. Thank you for listening. I'll catch you at the next episode.